I wonder, have you ever found yourself in a position where you needed to persuade somebody of something that you wanted or something that you needed? Have you ever found yourself in that position? I think for all of us, we can probably remember back. Do you remember when you were a little kid and you really wanted something from your parents? I don't know about you, but it was a process for me to work up the courage, number one, and secondly, to make sure that all of the conditions were perfect in order for me to go to my parents with a request. Anyone else like that? Oh man, I would wait. I would make sure, by the way, that I was good all day, right? So I wouldn't mess it up. I was a good boy. I was good all day long. And then, of course, I would wait till after dinner, After a meal, my parents are fed, I'd volunteer to do the dishes, of course, and everything would be good. Everything would be perfect. My dad would be sitting there in his chair, all comfortable and ready for the evening. And then that is when I would pounce, And that's when I would show up and be like, Dad, I've been really thinking. And I think it would probably be really good for my development as a young man to, whatever it is that I was coming up with. And I would go and I'd make sure, and I think we all know what that's like. And of course, as you become a teenager, you become a little bit more advanced in the way that you ask for things from your parents. A friend of mine recently told me how his teenage daughter sat him and his wife down and presented a PowerPoint presentation as to why she and her friends would go do something for spring break. And he said it was like 27 slides long and, had all of this information and they had everything planned out. And, the older you get a little bit more. I remember very well my conversation with my parents when I asked them if I could dye my hair. I just wanted those silver tips, late 90s, it was something, right? And I remember how I prepared for that conversation, and you want to make sure you have all of the facts. But as we go through life, things don't necessarily change, just the stakes become a little bit higher when it comes to those kind of conversations. If you've ever entered into your boss's office and prepared to present to them why you deserve a raise, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you've had to sit down and had a hard conversation with someone else, or maybe you've finally been able to sit down to share the gospel, and you're having a conversation with a friend who needs the Lord, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna share the gospel with them as we get together for coffee. And you know what it's like to think through and to make sure that you're communicating effectively and clearly your position, because the older we get, or depending on the situation, the stakes get higher, the impact is more, our enjoyment, maybe our financial security for the future, even eternity may be on the line. And I think we recognize that if we do not state our case well, it could possibly mean a good thing, but it could also mean a less than desirable outcome. I know you guys want to know this, but when I asked my parents to dye my hair, it didn't go very well. And me being the rebellious teenager that I was, when my parents went away on a trip for a few days, I did it anyway. Yeah, so there's a whole chunk of my summer I don't really remember because I was in my room. So anyway, I was grounded with silver tips. So actually, it didn't turn out how I wanted it to. It was just a little bit more of a gross yellow. I don't know. Anyway, we can talk about that and you can ask me about it. It didn't go very well, I'll just say. But we know that when we have those kind of conversations, when we're presenting an idea, presenting something, the stakes can be quite high. As we return to our study here in the book of Esther, we're reminded of the consequences if Esther fails to convince or to persuade the Persian king Ahasuerus to change his official policy at this point, that all of the Jews were to be exterminated from the Medo-Persian Empire. The stakes for this moment are very, very high. If you think back with me, he had been convinced and honestly tricked through the bribery of a man named Haman, someone who was high up within his court, a leading official. Haman had convinced King Ahasuerus that it would be better for the kingdom and it would be better for the king's coffers as he's trying to recoup some of the losses that he suffered while in battle there in Greece. He said it would be a good thing for us if we took care of these people and exterminated this, what he described, maybe someone would say today, as a cancer within their society. He had convinced the king and it had been signed and the decree had gone all across, of course, the kingdom. But what Haman and the king did not know at this point was that the king's new wife, a woman by the name of Esther, who had been discovered through a degrading 400-woman contest to find the next queen, they did not know that she was a Jew. And they did not know that the very man that had stirred up the anger of Haman, her cousin Mordecai, who became her adopted father, They also did not know that he was related to her either. Now, in our last message, what we saw was that Mordecai, once this decree was put out, of course, the Jews around the land were concerned. It was a problem. Mordecai reached out to Esther. I mean, she was the queen, and he reached out to her, and through a bunch of different conversations, which we've covered throughout our study so far, he challenged her that she needed to go and seek the favor of the king and try to convince him to stop this purge because the clock was ticking. An 11th month countdown was started. They knew the date. They knew when it was coming. And he's like, you've got to go. You've got to talk to the king and you've got to convince him to stop this. And so with the courage that very few of us would possess, Esther, against all odds, with her own life at stake, approached the king without being summoned, which was a huge no-no at the time. And what can only be described as the providence of God, and we dealt with that very clearly, King Ahasuerus not only received her, but he offered to meet whatever request that she had. And this is where it gets kind of interesting. Because if you remember back a couple of weeks ago, when he extended that golden scepter to her in receptiveness and said, hey, I'll give you whatever you want up to the half of my kingdom, we're all like, get him, right? Like, now's your chance. And instead what she does is she says, I want to invite you to a banquet. And not only do I want to invite the king, but I want to invite Haman as well. And all of us are like, what is she doing? And if you remember back, there was a study done by 40 different rabbis. Now I'm going to get my numbers wrong. It was either 12 or 40, one of those two. A bunch of rabbis, and they tried to figure out why she made this decision, and they couldn't come to a conclusion of that. And so for thousands of years, people have been trying to figure out this. I happen to believe that it was just simply the pathway that God gave to her through her 3 days of fasting and prayer and seeking as to what she was to do. And so they have this meal, and guess what? The meal went very well. The king was pleased. He was happy. Haman felt very honored. And so once again, he says to her during that meal, Esther, what can I do for you? Up to the half of my kingdom, I'll give you whatever you want. And to that Esther responded, she said, I would like you to come back tomorrow for another meal. She didn't take the opportunity in that moment. She said, if I've pleased you, then I would like for you to come back for another meal. And that's where we left the story, except there was a few other things that happened, if you remember. Along the way, as Haman left that meal, all happy and ecstatic over his selection to be a part of a private dinner with the king and the queen, along the way, he saw Mordecai outside the gates, and it kind of ticked him off. You know, he saw him and it brought up all of that anger again. He's frustrated and he goes home and he tells his wife and he tells his some people in his life, friends. He says, I'm so upset. I had such a great day, but I just ruined everything by seeing Mordecai, you know, and he's just boo-hooing. And so they said, well, here's the solution. Why don't you build a gallows 75 feet high and why don't you just put him on there? And we spent a little bit of time digging into the Persian death culture and the kinds of things that they would do. Basically what they would do is they would build a pole and they would just impale the body on that pole and just stick them right on the pole as a way to show people like, hey, this is what happens if you mess with me. And so Haman thought it was a great idea. And so he determined in the morning, I'm going to go in early. I'm going to go to work early. I'm going to make sure I get an audience with the king. And I'm going to ask him, please let me kill Mordecai. Hopefully you've never had a conversation like that with your boss. But that's what he said. And he goes, and sure enough, he goes there early. But this is where we start to see the hand of God beginning to work. By the way, he's been working all throughout this story, but we see the evidence of God working once again because that night the king couldn't sleep. He had insomnia, and while he was there, he said, what is the most boring thing in the world? And that is the records of the kingdom. And so he said, you know, I've done this before with, you ever watch those like animal shows, you know what I'm talking about, like on Netflix? Like 2 hours of like, this is a beaver, you know? Let's watch him build, you know, cut down a tree for 35 minutes. That puts me right to sleep. I have a friend who can't sleep. He watches farming on YouTube. Have you ever seen that? Anyway, okay, you should look it up. It's really great. Just in a tractor for 4 hours plowing a field. It's a great way to fall asleep. Anyway, he's like, what's the most boring thing I can think of? Come and read to me the records. Well, while they're reading the records to him, he doesn't fall asleep, but he takes note that someone had actually saved his life, and he asked them, what was done for this man who saved my life? And what do you know? It was Mordecai. And they said, well, nothing's been done for Mordecai. At that point, the king then says, well, let's figure out something to do. It's early in the morning. Who's out there in the court? Haman's out in the court. Great. Tell Haman to come in. Haman comes in, and the king says to Haman, Haman, what should be done to the man the king delights to honor? And Haman's like, he's talking about me. This is going to be great. And so he describes this amazing way to honor somebody, and then the king drops a bomb. He says, all right, go and do the same thing to Mordecai the Jew who's out there. And Haman just was, embarrassed, destroyed. But he does it. He has no other options. He does it. And so he honors Mordecai. Then he goes home. It says that he covered his head. He was shamed. He got home. He tells his family. And they're like, man, this is not a good situation. You're trying to kill these people, and here's where we're at. This is not a good situation at all. And then at that moment, the king's eunuchs show up to bring him to the next banquet. And that's where we pick it up today. We're picking it up to the second banquet. What's going to happen now that all this is happening between the two, the first banquet and the second banquet? A lot happened. And now we come to Esther chapter 7, where the tension of the story is a little bit thick. I don't know if you can feel it or not. How's this all going to play out? The moment of truth has finally arrived. What is Esther going to say? Is she going to say anything at all? Well, let's find out. With our first point this morning, we see Esther's courageous appeal. Esther's courageous appeal. Look with me at verse number 1. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, what is your petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted you. What is your request? And it shall be, man, he sounds like a husband, right? What do you need? What can I do for you? I don't understand what's happening right now. No, what can I do for you? Okay. I'm sure it was a little bit different than that. He says, and it shall be performed. And he says it again, even to the half of the kingdom. Now, I've been to some awkward dinner parties before. I'm sure you have as well. But I have to think that there was probably a unique weirdness to the whole environment as they came back for the second day, at least for Esther. I mean, put yourself in Esther's shoes. You're like, this guy wants to kill me. The king, we don't really have a relationship, but at least I have a little bit of influence. And they're sitting there eating and drinking and enjoying themselves. And she's just there okay, I gotta say something. Now is my time. She's summoning the courage. And I'm sure when the king again says, hey, I'll give you half the kingdom again. And of course we know that was metaphorical. It would have helped her, but she eventually finds the courage to speak up. And she says this in verse number 3. And Esther the queen answered and said, this is so unique. If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, here it is, let my life be given me at my petition. She says, let my life be spared. I'm begging you for my life and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could not compensate for the king's loss. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that Esther was very methodical in thinking through how she was going to address the king. And I want you to notice the way that she does it. She comes in with honor. She acknowledges his position. She acknowledges his power over her life. And then she very carefully emphasizes the threat that is on her own life because she knows, that's the first thing she brings up, because she knows the king will pay attention to that. So she doesn't just start screaming, right? Or you won't believe what's going on. She is very methodical and very intentional in the way that she is communicating. She is not presumptuous, but she's personal. She never took the king's favor for granted. In fact, I think you can read in this that she didn't really know what to expect at this point. There was no guarantee of his response, but she is boldly petitioning for his grace. Now, there's a couple other things that are happening here. For the first time, she also declares that she is not a Persian. That would have been the assumption of who she was. But for the first time, she says, there is a threat on me. And then she says, I and my people, meaning she's like, there's something that's different about me. There's a distinctness about me. And she's open with him. She's saying, I want to live. I want to live. I don't want to die. And I want my people to live. And I want my people to survive as well. It's interesting that she used the exact wording that is in the decree that was sent out around the kingdom in chapter 3 and verse number 13, where she says, destroy, kill, and cause to perish. She says, we're to be destroyed, slain, to perish. Those words right there are the same words that are used in the decree that was sent out all over the land. She's very open here. And then, of course, she adds to it somewhat ironically. Here's what she says. She says, if it was just about a matter of me being sold as a slave, then I wouldn't have even brought it up. I wouldn't have even brought it before you. But because it's about our life, because it's about somebody wanting to kill us, I have to say something. Understand, this was a moment of great vulnerability in her life. She was putting herself out there. Remember, the king is not known for his mature responses, is he? Who knows what he might have said? But she puts it out there, and I believe through the courage and strength that God gave to her, she was able then to speak up in the moment, which is a great reminder for all of us as followers of Jesus Christ, that our God is sensitive and he knows when we are in moments of weakness. Our Heavenly Father knows that when we are vulnerable, when we are weak, when we are in difficult circumstances, that's when his strength is made perfect through us. You know, how often are we afraid of weakness today? And I don't know about you, I don't want to be perceived as weak. I don't want to ever feel weak in my parenting, in my leadership. I don't want to sit there and be like, man, I am so weak in this. I don't want that. We struggle with that. But as followers of Christ, we have to admit that we are weak and that we do need help. In fact, I think it would be good if we agreed with the Apostle Paul when he said in 2 Corinthians 12, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. And he says this, most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities. Why? That the power of Christ may rest upon me. Listen, as followers of Jesus, the power of Christ is what we should want, and the power of Christ is what we need. It's what we need today. And it is found, notice, the power of Christ is found in our weakness. And so when we find ourselves in those moments where we're like, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to say, I don't know where I'm going to go with this, that's when God's strength can be revealed through us. And Esther here is experiencing this. I don't think any of us can really understand and fathom the gravity of the moment, but yet she stands and she boldly speaks up and declares what is happening. Because remember, she could have just let it go, right? Esther could have been like, hey, you know what? I don't want to mess up the good thing I've got going on here. Remember what happened to the last queen? I'm going to do everything I can to avoid getting anyone angry or anyone upset. She could have done that. No one would ever know, but what we see is her confronting evil head on. You know, I'm ashamed to say that often as followers of Christ, we have become very comfortable with allowing evil and allowing sin to run free. But the truth is for us today is that sin, evil, if it is not confronted in some way, it will only escalate rather than dissipate. Have you ever stood back and be like, you know what, let's just see, maybe it'll kind of play out and fizzle out. Listen, there is going to come a time in your life, there's going to come a moment where you as a follower of Jesus need to muster the courage to stand up and to speak out for what is right, to call evil what it is. So often we do not confront it. That's why the Apostle Paul, he addressed it very strongly in the book of 1 Corinthians. And in 1 Corinthians, he challenged them on a lot of the sin that they were struggling with as a church, and he confronted it. And the reason he confronted it is how he concluded in verse number 6 of chapter 5. He says, your glorying is not good. Then he says this, know you not that a little leaven leavens the whole lump. It's the idea that a little bit of sin, if it is not checked, if it's not taken care of, it very quickly spreads. That's true in our own lives. That's true in a church body. That's true in a society. If evil is not confronted, if evil is not called out, then it will spread. Whether it's the sin of a Christian friend that you know about, that you know you're like, man, I should say something about this. I should talk to them about it, but you keep putting it off, Whether it's the evil or sin in a community or even within our own hearts, we must have boldness to stand against evil. Boldness to stand against evil. God gives us courage to stand up for what is right. See, God never calls us to be courageous as an end in itself. God doesn't just say, hey, I want you to be courageous just to be courageous. No, God gives us courage for believing or for doing something for his kingdom. God gave to Esther courage in that moment to stand up to save her people, to save even her own self. And so she spoke up, she had courage, and it was for the purposes of God. And so this is just kind of an understanding that we need to have. God wants us to be courageous and bold, but we need to make sure that we're standing up for what is right, number one. And we can also learn from Esther in the sense of how she was courageous. She was very intentional and wise in the way that she spoke up. She confronted evil in the right way, and her stance, her willingness to stand up and speak had a tremendous effect on the king. Look with me at verse number 5. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he? And where is he? Who would dare presume in his heart to do so? I want you to know the king here is steamed. As the kids today would say, he's crashing out right now, okay? Like we're watching him, just losing it. I want to know who he is. I want to know where he is. Who would dare threaten the life of his queen? And now we're at this point where we're like, this is now Esther's moment, okay? This is her chance. She's been subtle. She's been like, there's something out there. My life is at stake. He loses it. Who is it? Tell me who it is. And now Esther just lets him have it. Verse number 6. And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. I love it. It is this wicked Haman. Now we know why he's in the room, okay? It is this wicked Haman. Notice, then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. To me, I just can imagine all of the pent up energy, the fear, the anger that Esther had been working through, all of the emotion of the last few months was finally released in this sentence as she points at him and says, he is the adversary. He is the one. He is our enemy. He is the one who's trying to eliminate my existence. And it is here that we see our second thought this morning, Haman's wickedness exposed. So she makes this courageous appeal, but now we're going to see his wickedness exposed. She points to him and says, this wicked Haman. At that point, I would love to know what the vibe of the room was. If you've ever been in a room where someone said something shocking, I can't believe they just said that. The tension and whoa, what all the servants, we're all like, the king just is like, what is, I would love to know what it was like. And by the way, Haman is no idiot. That didn't sound right. We don't like him, but he is no idiot, okay? This guy, I think he was starting to figure things out when she used the exact wording that was in the decree. Because for sure that he wrote it. Or at least for sure he double checked it yeah, that's really good. No, actually put in there, destroy. Make sure that they know, no, we want to kill them all. I'm sure things were maybe starting to click in his head and maybe he's starting to figure out what was going on. And he's like, okay, maybe she doesn't really know I was a part of it. What does she know? But now he's been named. He's been called out. And he's stunned. He is afraid. Better to be understood in the word that's translated afraid for us is the idea of being terrified. He's like, his heart stops, drops, whatever. You say, why? Why is he afraid? He has power in the kingdom. Why would he be afraid? Well, because of his wickedness, his sin was now exposed to the world. His evil intentions were exposed in a way that he never thought. Did you know that whenever a person's true identity or their sin identity is exposed, it's terrifying? It's terrifying. Just this week, the NBA was shocked to learn some things. If you know what the NBA is, National Basketball Association, professional basketball. I was shocked that there were some revelations that came out this week of some of the players and coaches being indicted in gambling investigations. One of them involved illegal sports betting, insider information, and another involved some rigged poker games. The two most well-known that were named in this right now were Terry Rozier and Chauncey Billups. Chauncey Billups is a head coach of a basketball team, an NBA team. He's the head coach, and he's indicted in this. Both of them were arrested at 6 a.m. in their homes by the FBI, and honestly, their arrest stunned the NBA. I spent some time watching some videos of people reacting and other NBA well-known people responding to this, and people were truly stunned. You say, why were they stunned? Well, because when sin is revealed, it will always have a surprising and unintended consequences. See, sin or evil within our hearts that is hidden never lets you know that it is leading you into a trap. The father in Proverbs chapter 5 informed his son in verse 22. He said, his own iniquities entrap the wicked man, and he shall be caught in the cords of his sin. He shall die without instruction, and in the greatness of his folly he shall go astray. In Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 27, he said, can a man take fire to his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can one walk on hot coals and his feet be not burned? Now, the obvious answer to that question is no, you can't. But the point is that whenever there is sin in our lives that is suddenly exposed, you're going to be in for some difficult times. Haman here is now experiencing the multiplied burdens of his exposed wickedness. Which brings me to a point this morning that really helped me this week, a quote that just helped me so much this week. And it is this: live in such a way that when the concealed is revealed, it brings reward, not regret. We need to live our lives in such a way that when what is concealed is revealed, it brings reward, not regret. That's based off of Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 14 that says, for God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Well, our focus here has been on the negative aspects of hidden sin. This principle also applies in a positive way. And I think you see that there in the verse, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Here's the thing. God knows all things, doesn't he? He knows all things. And because God knows all things, he knows the good that you do that no one else knows about. He knows about the people that you have helped, about the sacrifices you have made, the service you have done for the kingdom. It will also be revealed by God. But in this context, we are seeing the sin, the wickedness of Haman being revealed, and it is shocking. Well, how did the king respond in verse number 7? And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. He couldn't even stay in the room. He left the room. And Haman, notice, stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Once confronted, Haman here is terrified, desperate, and out of control. And in that moment, when the king got up and left, he should have followed the king. But instead, what we see him doing, he's caught in his evil, he's caught in his wickedness, and so in a panic, he stands up and he rushes over to the queen. I'm understanding it to beg for mercy. Ironically, someone who would never give mercy to anyone else or to even a group of people, but he is now needing mercy for himself. And here's again another lesson that we learn about hidden sin. We will face the consequences of our sin because we get caught in our sin. We get caught in our sin because we do not confess our sin. And we don't confess our sin because we think we can hide it. We think that we can hide it. But listen, God knows you for who you are. He knows your deepest secrets. He knows the sin you have committed. And here's what is so amazing about our God is that he knows us at our worst, and yet he still loves us. And he sent his son, Jesus, to pay the penalty for all of our sin. Romans chapter 5 and verse 8 says, but God demonstrated his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, meaning while we are in our sin, Christ died for us. To the praise of the glory of his grace, Ephesians tells us, wherein he has made us accepted in the beloved, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins according to the riches of his grace. If you're not a Christian today, if there's never been a time that you have confessed your sin and your desperate need of Christ and received his saving grace, then I encourage you today to call out to him. Confess your sin. Turn to him. Call on his name for salvation. But if you are here and you're a Christian today, you call Jesus your Lord, and you are struggling with unconfessed sin, can I challenge you today? Don't wait until it is exposed. Don't wait for it to be exposed to the world. Confess your sin. Make it right before God. Find somebody who loves Jesus and loves you and talk to them. If it's something that is continually in your life and you're like, I just can't break free from this bondage and it's holding me back, find somebody who you love and who you know loves the Lord and talk to them and find accountability, because listen, it is far better to deal with it now than to have it exposed publicly in a way that affects those that you love. Sin that is hidden always grows, but when it is exposed to the light, it begins to die. We cannot live lives that are holding in, and we like to think, well, it's my sin and it's my consequences. But that's a lie from the devil himself. I believe that. It is short-sighted in our thinking that our actions do not affect anyone else. Because every single one of us has been burdened, has been hurt, has been distressed by the sin of another. Just recently, someone that I know, a pastor that I know, his sin was exposed publicly. And it was devastating to him, to his family, to his ministry, to hundreds of people that are part of his life and ministry. And it's easy for us to say like, oh yeah, well, when a pastor does it, for sure, like that's the worst and that affects so many people. But listen, every one of us has been affected by the exposed sin of somebody else. And the burden that it is, the hurt that it is, the difficult challenges that it brings. And while your sin may not make headlines like the NBA scandal, hidden sin always leads to the same place, destruction. And whenever it is exposed, I got to tell you, it's never convenient. No one ever shapes the release of their hidden sin. But while it's never convenient and while it is difficult, I do want to remind us once again, our hidden sin is always redemptive if we bring it to the Lord, because he will forgive you. It does not matter what it is that you're carrying, what it is that you've done, what it is that you are hiding. Maybe even from those that you love the most, you're hiding it from them. I got to tell you, turn to Jesus, fall before the cross and beg his forgiveness, and he will forgive you. Haman here is caught in his sin. And the consequences of his wickedness, his attempt at destroying God's people is revealed, and now it's about to be dealt with as we find God's justice revealed in verse number 8. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen on the bed whereon Esther was. Then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in the house? And as the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So Haman had gotten up and he had gone over and he had fallen there in front of Esther. And she was, when it says bed, it's the idea of like a couch. And of course, in that day, and in Jewish times too, later on, they would often eat in banquets reclining on like a, I don't know what we call it today, a chaise lounge. I don't know, something like that. It was this longer bench and they would recline on their side and that's how they would eat. They would reach into the table, there'd be a table in the center and everyone would be reclining around it. And so Haman, in his fear, jumps up and he runs over, and I don't know if he tripped and fell or if he threw himself at her feet, but I got to tell you, he invaded her personal space, so much so that when the king comes in, he sees her on the couch, on the bed there around the table, and he assumes in his mind that he's trying to violate her. That's what he sees, and that's why he yells out like, are you kidding me? He's going to force the queen like right in front of me. And I love the way that it's written here, as he says the words, they cover his face. I mean, if you ever, I'm sure you see in the movies, when they're about to execute somebody and they put the hood over their head, right? Like it's like that. And it says like, as the words are coming out, which means that the soldiers there were ready for this. They were like, oh man, it's on. Like, you're done, Haman. Like they're pulling the bag out of their pocket, like this is happening. As the words are coming out, it's like, boom, they got him. They covered his face. It's it's a sign of official condemnation. I mean, it's over. Verse number 9, and Harbonah, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, King, behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, stands in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him on it. I'm not going to read too deeply into this here, but it seems like the staff of the palace didn't have a great deal of love for Haman either. Because as soon as his fate was sealed, this servant decides now he's going to speak up. And like, hey, king, I just want to point this out, but he's got a 75-foot pole in his front yard. And he was intending to put Mordecai on it. I don't know why I felt led to say it. I just felt led to say it, I just wanted to tell you. And to that, the king is like, perfect. Stick him on that. Put him on it. Attach him to it. And they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified or appeased. Now, this moment here is a powerful picture of God's sovereignty and God's perfect justice. I mean, the gallows that Haman built for Mordecai became the instrument of his own death. And for us, this is a clear reminder that God not only judges evil, but in this moment, what is happening, there's a judgment of evil, but there's a restoration of things that sin had broken. The justice here isn't just about punishment, though it is. It's also what we're seeing here is there is God making things right at this point. Which reminds us that though justice sometimes may be delayed, it will never be denied. Because man, how many times in our life do we look at our world and we're like, evil is winning? You ever feel that way? Wow, they are winning. Evil's winning. Satan is winning. But God is working as well. He is turning the story. He is putting things together towards His glory and for our good. And while evil may have its moment, God always has the last word. And this is something that can encourage us this morning. Something that can give us hope today to keep living faithfully for Him. Even though it seems like all around us, everything's falling apart, we can continue to live for the Lord. We can continue to do the right things, living by faith, because we know that the same God who's making things right in Esther's day is making things right in our world today as well. We just don't see it. We don't know all that it is that He is doing. And so we take to heart the words of the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 12, where he says, repay no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lies in you, live peaceably with all men. Now, I know we love this verse because we're like, well, it doesn't lie within me. I am not going to live peaceably. Well, if you have the Holy Spirit of God within you, then you've got everything you need to obey this verse, okay? So we're just going to get that excuse out of the way, okay? And then he says, dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, put it in its right place, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink, for in so doing you shall heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, say it with me, but overcome evil with good. As we close this morning, the story of Esther 7 reminds us that the unseen hand of God is never absent. Even when the stakes are high and it seems like evil is winning, Esther's courage shows us what faith looks like even when fear is so loud and pounding in our mind. Esther's courage also encourages us to speak up, to say something, to speak up against evil in this world, to have a testimony of truth. Haman's downfall, of course, shows us what happens when pride and sin goes unchecked in our lives. And then lastly, God's justice reminds us that no evil escapes His sight and no faithfulness will go unrewarded. And so I encourage you, my brothers and sisters, this morning, take courage, stand for what is right, confess what is wrong, and trust that the same God who worked behind the scenes is working behind the scenes in your life and in our world today. And we can trust Him. We can trust Him.